Hello and welcome to this webinar and a broadcast on the topic of the public transport system in times of COVID-19. I'm Fifi Peters. It has made over 125 million train trips and 38 million bus trips. It's created thousands of jobs and it's attracted billions of foreign investment in Gauteng, which is South Africa's economic hub. I'm talking about the Gautrain, the 80-kilometer rail system that has been transporting commuters for the past 10 years. Public transport is a significant player in the mobility ecosystem here in South Africa. And while Gauteng has become a hotspot for new coronavirus cases, the government faces two challenges: dealing with the health crisis and rebooting the economy. The strategic focus for Gauteng is currently on smart mobility as an enabler to connect healthcare and other workers to their jobs. However, the future is uncertain, and in this uncertainty, we ask what can be done to rebuild the trust between public transport operators and passengers. We welcome your views and your thoughts on the matter and look forward to answering any questions that you may have throughout this webinar. But first, let's take a look at the background.
Economic growth and development has been a priority for the Gauteng provincial government for years. Now, with the negative impact of COVID-19, it remains one of the key focus areas for economic recovery after the pandemic. Among the many changes COVID-19 has brought to society are the changes in travel regulations and social gatherings. The public transport sector is well aware of these changes in regulations. Gautrain, for example, employs several health and safety measures, including regular cleaning and disinfecting of trains, buses and minibuses, and ensuring social distancing as well as the wearing of masks. Gautrain has operated for 10 years and has clocked 125 million train passenger trips and 38 million bus passenger trips. Safe, reliable and convenient public transport is crucial in these times to ensure passenger safety while contributing to the economy and society. Recently, Gauteng MEC for Public Transport and Roads Infrastructure, Mr. Jacob Mamabolo, alluded to Gautrain being in the forefront of safe public transport as he examines ways of growing the economy through smart investments in transport, restructuring the urban form around transport nodes, as well as the use of technology as an enabler of better and more efficient transport systems. This shows Gautrain's positive contribution to spatial development, urban restructuring, economic growth, job creation, and modal integration. Gauteng's current strategic focus is economic growth and smart mobility as an enabler of the vision for growing its economy. Smart mobility refers to innovative ways of getting around. It involves the use of various transport modes that are smarter, cleaner, safer, and integrated, and that moves people, goods, and services more efficiently. It promotes sustainable mobility and is coupled with urban, social, economic, and environmental benefits. Gautrain is such a smart mobility service. It uses the latest technology. It safely and comfortably moves people to their destinations through an environmentally friendly transport option. The Gautrain is supported by an integrated network of other buses, minibuses, bus rapid transport systems, and other rail services.
Joining me today to discuss the topic of public transport in the times of COVID-19 are William Dax, CEO of the Gautrain Management Agency, Professor Salim Abdul Karim, Chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 in South Africa, Paul Soto, Chairperson of the Provincial United Commuters Voice, and Tshepo Khare, Acting CEO of the Railway Safety Regulator. Thanks to all of you for your time. And Prof. Karim, just to begin with you, just to lay down the law of the land pertaining to COVID-19 and exactly what the numbers are looking like. At the weekend, the health minister tweeting worrying numbers, an increase of over 13,000 cases that we did see, bringing our total to around 340 or so. I'd just like to understand from you, Prof. Karim, where we are in the cycle and how long we should expect to be seeing such frightening numbers in terms of the record daily increases in new cases.
Yeah, so while we initially in March saw a very slow increase in the number of cases, That situation has changed. As we ease the restrictions of the lockdown, the virus now is starting to spread much more readily. We are now seeing in the region of around 13 to 14,000 new cases each day, and that is going to rise as we head towards our peak. We're expecting our peak to occur somewhere in the next 6 to 8 weeks, plus minus, and then we'll have a bit of stability before it comes down. But it doesn't need to be so. We can change all of that, of course, with much stronger adherence to prevention measures. And there's no question that public transport plays a key role. It plays a key role not just for the economy, but also to ensure that people can get to health services. And so we need to ensure that public transport is a mechanism that is done safely, and that is doable. It's doable with buses and taxis and aeroplanes. It's just a question of ensuring that we follow the correct procedures.
I mean, conversations around the role that public transport is having in facilitating the spread of COVID-19 are being had in the world over. In London, we are seeing the Prime Minister there encouraging citizens to walk or to cycle to work. We even use their private cars as a means of avoiding public transport to stop the spread. Prof, I suppose another question that I'm trying to get from you is how instrumental possibly are public transport systems in the spread of COVID-19 right now as you see it?
Well, given that the virus itself cannot spread on its own, it needs humans to move it from one place to another. And because public transport is often in a confined space, it really presents many challenges. And those challenges range from just being ensuring that the social distancing that's involved in getting to the vehicle and then inside of the vehicle and then upon disembarkation. So all of those three steps are critical. Our focus has largely been on ensuring that there's adequate social distancing, because that's really key. And of course, with that comes ventilation. So all of those steps are going to be critical, because we are already seeing in many places, we're seeing that now in India as well, where public transport is playing a role in transmission.
Worrying stuff there. But William, just to bring you in to understand exactly how many people you are moving right now, I was looking at your website, and in the 2018 financial year, it was around 15 million people that used the Gautrain every year. I do imagine that COVID-19 has had a big impact on those numbers. How big of an impact?
Yes, it's had a very big impact. But following on from what Prof. Karim said, I think we should start measuring how many people we're not transporting. The message which goes out, and it really hurts to say this as a public transport operator, is don't travel if you don't need to. So normally in the period from end of March up until today, we probably would have transported about 4 million people. And I think we've done probably 12% of that. So a lot of people have observed the directives given by government, and they stayed at home. Or we suspect a lot of people have moved back to their private cars. What I'm really pleased about, though, is that the people who have used Gautrain, and probably estimating probably about 20% of our passengers don't have access to cars, is that every single one of them has obeyed the directives that have been given. They've worn masks, they've sanitized, they've maintained very good social distancing on this. And for us, it's been about being able to accommodate the numbers and be sure that however many people arrive, we can transport them as safely as possible.
Well, it is great that your commuters are doing their part to stop the spread, William. But I also want to know, there are people right now, we were having a conversation before this discussion began in the newsroom, and many people are working from home, particularly here in Sandton, where a lot of the economic activity takes place. In fact, many companies have told those people that they'll probably likely work from home for the remainder of the year. For those commuters, however, who are choosing to still use the Gautrain and who have to return to the office, what have you done as the Gautrain to make sure that their experience, their trips are safer?
Well, we view it as a partnership. We do a whole range of things. We make sanitizers available. We disinfect our trains and buses after each trip. We've made sure that our air conditioners are pushing as much fresh air as possible through our trains and our buses to make sure that the ventilation is as good as possible. We screen all our staff. They all wear protective equipment. But ultimately, it comes down to people and the way that they behave. And that's why I think that the message really has gone out really well. And it's been, don't travel if you don't have to. Work from home if you can. If you do have to travel, try and time your distance, your trip as well as possible. Maintain your social distancing and wear the mask. And I think that combination of operator and commuter has been very, very powerful in this regard. And that's why I think it's all about diminishing and reducing the risk to commuters, and really trying to limit the ability of the virus to spread. As Prof. Karim said, people transmit the virus. It doesn't do it by itself. So we think that by putting these basic measures in place, we can really be a part of limiting the spread. And as I said, just getting the people who have to travel to and from work safely.
And I see that you've introduced quite a number of online offerings as well. Last time I used the Gautrain, I couldn't, for instance, use my bank card to clock in to go inside the train. But I'm just wondering how many of the commuters who are using the Gautrain because they have to go to work are taking advantage of these online offerings that you've introduced to, try avoid any contact with surfaces. And how many of them actually know about them, William?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So there's been a big uptick in the number of people who putting value on their cards online. Most people, and I travel on the Gautrain 2 or 3 times a week, most people actually have a contactless experience. They preloaded value on their cards, or they're using their debit or credit card, because we've got that technology now to accept that type of money or fare transfer. Sanitizers are foot operated. You kind of open the door with your elbow, you sit. So I actually make my trip without coming into contact with any surface at all with my hands. With my mask on, there's no touching of the face or anything like that. So I think it's been a good combination of technology and then just good practical, good practice that commuters are doing.
Well, let's hear from an organization right now that does represent the interests of commuters. And Paul, if you can just give us some of the experiences of some of the commuters under the United Commuters Voice that have used the Gautrain. I'll tell you, I was speaking to a friend of mine ahead of this conversation, and he was quite pleased with the experience of the Gautrain, said that the carriages are sanitized regularly, said that people do obey social distancing. In fact, he even sent me a selfie of himself on the train this morning with his mask. So he's had a good experience. But what about some of the members in the United Commuters Voice?
Look, it's our members. They are following the laws of the COVID-19, or the regulations of the COVID-19. But what I would say from the Gautrain management, they need to be consistent in terms of the sanitizing, particularly in self-service machines. If a person is going to reload his card or her card, someone needs to sanitize the machine, because sometimes you find that a commuter will go and reload a card after no one is sanitizing the machine, and the other commuter will come, like Dr. Karim indicated, that the virus doesn't move, but people can move the virus. So those are kinds of things that we saw that Gautrain management need to adjust on it. But in terms of commuters are disciplined. When they go to Gautrain, they've got their mask, and they are respecting the social distance. When they're inside the Gautrain, they are observing the 1 meter, 1.5 meter from one and another. I think that is one of the things that we need to check if it's coming to Gautrain management.
All right, so perhaps more people can be put there on the ground to sanitize some of those machines. But Paul, I mean, is it the 4th of May? The 4th of May when the Gautrain was allowed to resume under level 4. And under level 3, of course, we saw even more people return to work, and also advanced level 3. Ahead of this conversation, you had a bit of concerns around the issue of trust, because that's what we're here to talk about, right? How to improve the public trust in our public transport system. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more.
The public trust in public transport, and it's come whereby you find that we need to have a working relationship, a close working relationship between commuters. Before they become commuters, they are community. Like Matsepo from the Railway Safety Regulator indicated about the vandalism. We need to check also the relationship that the community is having with the law enforcement, because it's one of the things post the COVID-19 that we're experiencing. Though Gautrain didn't experience the vandalism system as that much, but we've got other operators that they experienced a serious challenge of vandalism. Like Metro Rail, they experienced a serious challenge of vandalism. We've got a challenge whereby you find that there is a gap in terms of the railway police and the local police to address the issue of vandalism. So those are the serious issues that we need to look, because during this COVID-19, vandalism escalated higher, and the police alone cannot do much. We need to have a community that will report crime. And if you can check, we've got WhatsApp numbers, but in a law enforcement agency, we don't have a WhatsApp numbers that you can report those crimes. Sometimes you need to have a WhatsApp numbers, or you need to have an area where if you see a crime, you will be able to report it. But we don't have it, particularly in a railway police. We need a law enforcement agent to come together and work together as a unit.
All right, so a stronger whistleblowing system essentially there between the rail operators and also the passengers and the community. Tabo, some words from you as the regulator, and perhaps let's pick up from where Paul has left us in terms of his concerns around vandalism. He is highlighting that it's not too much of a concern for the Gautrain, and perhaps William will tell us in just a moment. But as a regulator, how concerned are you around the vandalism that is taking place on the railway trains right now? Also, what you're doing about it?
Thank you, Fifi. I think just listening to all the panelists, particularly Paul and William, a few things that I want to pick up on. William, I always thought that when I start this, I'll make reference to Transport for London and how their messaging was, don't use public transport. I actually have an example closer to home in the Gautrain where you're saying don't use public transport. That obviously is a very big thing for a transport professional or for a public transport operator, where you are discouraging people, but therefore leading them directly into you're leading them directly into private car use. And naturally, at the end of this whole thing, you'd have to attract them back into the system, and therefore we have to build the confidence. One of the key things that we are seeing that we think is at the heart of restoring that confidence in the public transport system, in this instance, particularly in the railway sector, is the issue of theft and vandalism. Our statistics show that in the last couple of years, we have recorded such an increase of security-related incidents at around 9,000. If you look at our state of safety for last year, it will tell you that about 9,000 of the security-related incidents were reported, and 90% of that is actually theft and vandalism. Now, looking at this period of the lockdown, where most of the railway operators were not actually in operation, we again, with great concern, continue to see this increase. In the first quarter alone, we've got about 1,400 incidents of theft and vandalism within the railway space. And that obviously is a concern because it affects a whole host of things. In most instances, particularly within the PRASA network, and I'm sure within the Gautrain as well, there has been a slight increase, but maybe because it's such a closed system, you don't actually, it's better controlled. PRASA, because it's such an open network, we've seen, overhead wires being removed, and obviously that affects the ability of trains. We've seen vandalism in stations to the extent that when we were opening, as part of our inspections, we found that in some stations, the ablution facilities were completely vandalized. And I can imagine for an operator already experiencing reduced revenue as a result of the reduction in patronage, but also having then to spend more on the COVID measures themselves, but secondly, in actually trying to restore the service. So as a regulator, as part of the support we're giving to operators in this instance, we've been assessing their safety plans, and we are obviously putting a key focus on ensuring that there is safety and security of their assets primarily, but also the safety of the passengers. It's something that the regulator is actually focusing on. And with respect to PRASA, I think at this stage where you still have very low patronage numbers, we are actually thinking that as you build the system back up, you could actually start building your capacity in the security environment to ensure that by the time you've got a full service, you are in a better position to manage your safety issues. And I think that's the support that RSR will be providing, but also the focus that the RSR is giving towards the issues related to COVID. So it's really around vandalism. You will see on our social media platforms, we're also running a campaign to try and discourage and educate commuters about the impact of vandalism in this environment.
And Tsepo, I've got a couple of more questions for you, but I think let's just stick to this issue of vandalism and really get an insight to what degree is it an issue for you, William, and the Gautrain?
Fifi, it's a huge issue. You know, the fact that our trains still run isn't because people aren't targeting it, criminals aren't targeting it. It's because, as Tsepo said, we've been able to exercise some control of it. We had reports this morning that there were 3 separate attacks on the Gautrain system over the weekend. When I say attacks, I'm talking about people coming into the rail reserve at risk to their own life and limb, and trying to steal signaling cables. Now, 3 over a weekend. A year ago, we probably had 3 a month. So I think that this escalation in theft, and I don't want to call it vandalism. To me, vandalism is when someone comes in and it's a bit of damage, out of spite or something like that. This is people desperate to get copper and sell for 50 Rand without understanding that it causes millions of rands of damage. It's a huge problem. And Paul is absolutely right. The police are under-resourced in this, or they've got 1,000 other things to worry about. So somehow there's got to be a strategy that deals with it from a community point of view, a poverty feeding point of view, social networks, social needs, a whole range of initiatives. Because if we don't solve this problem, and if Gautrain doesn't come through COVID-19 intact, and if PRASA doesn't use the opportunity to rebuild itself, then trust and confidence will diminish. And the most important thing, long after COVID-19 is a distant memory, and please may that come sooner rather than later, the twin evils of congestion and environmental harm are going to be with us. We're all passionate about public transport. We're all passionate about A province and a country that works well, that moves people efficiently and safely in 10, 15 or 20 years' time. If we lose the battle to cable theft now, if we lose the battle to private car usage now, without having a plan to crowd people back into good public transport systems, then COVID-19 will be much more harmful than it should be, So the challenges for us in the rail industry is, first of all, get through COVID-19, keep people safe. Then secondly, come back stronger with functional, working, smarter public transport rail systems. That's the challenge for us.
And we'll unpack exactly what is meant by smarter when it comes to the Gautrain. But William, you have touched on what many are saying is the next crisis, that of environmental harm, or rather climate change. And Tsepo, I'd like to maybe understand, if we dial back to the current crisis that we're still facing right now, being COVID-19, how your standards, your safety standards in particular, have been changed to include COVID-19 as a form in which the operators need to adhere to by way of safety standards. What's changed?
Okay, I think with respect to standards, or what we call directions, we have obviously issued, the Department of Transport actually has issued new directions which regulate or just provide guidance on how we should protect people against COVID-19. Most of them include, I think, what you are already seeing within Gautrain, which includes social distancing. And again, as I say, that then has an impact on the numbers that can be allowed onto a train, sanitizing, wearing of masks. Within the PRASA environment, where overcrowding has been an issue over the past, it's currently not such a big issue, purely because of the low patronage. But you have seen that PRASA has introduced marshals who are expected to sort of help with the management of crowds at the station, but also to then ensure that within the station precinct, you actually have the numbers to allow for social distancing. But as William says, at the heart of restoring confidence in the system is ensuring that it is safe, it is efficient, and this period gives us an opportunity to look back at to play catch up, so to speak, even on some of our environmental efforts. And William also made reference to the smart mobility, and I see some of the things are already implemented at the Gautrain level. It is important that we are able to extend all of this to the entire network and ensure that even those who are using the metro rail system can benefit from a safe environment. And I think that which is what the current administrator is focusing on. And I think an incremental approach to opening up the system does really help them in improving what you currently have as part of the PRASA network. And I think integrating various services, I saw in your clip, you do show some level of integration between Gautrain, BRT, and it is important that we add Metro Rail into this. I know that with the Gauteng Transport Authority, that has just been recently established, those are some of the things that we're looking to do, because then that allows you to have an integrated ticketing system, to also be able to ensure that when you with one experience on one system actually translates to the other parts of the network. And I think that that's very important for users.
So we've got a couple of questions that are coming through from our listeners and those who are dialed into the webinar. And the first one is for you, William, if you don't mind. We did mention the fact that the numbers had dropped in terms of commuters that are using the Gautrain. A listener is actually wanting to know exactly, what those numbers are right now, and also to what degree is the Gautrain losing commuters, not from people working from home, but rather from the fact that more people are working from home, so the roads are not as congested as they were anymore. Therefore, it's more, cheaper and convenient to use your private car.
Yeah, Fifi, it'll never be cheaper. There's so many hidden costs in private car use, and as I was saying, a lot of those costs are imposed on other people, by causing accidents or environmental harm that comes from it. But be that as it may, the freeways are much less congested, and from a Gautrain point of view, we compete on time and we compete on cost compared to a private car use. For us to be most effective on time, we need congested roads, and we're not seeing that at the moment. We've had a look at some of the SANRIL data. It looks like road usage is up to about 50 or 60% of normal levels. So again, depending on how long lockdowns last, how long people stay at home, we would expect to see sometime in the next 4 to 5 months before the end of the year that road congestion levels will go up again. We'll be working on restoring confidence, getting people back onto public transport, but a Gautrain in particular. In terms of the specifics, we track our numbers daily, and we can draw a direct correlation between the infection rate and usage. So when infection rates spike, people stop using the train. So we're up at about 8,000, just under 8,000 passengers per day. And that dropped down last week back to around 6,000. So people are very responsive to what they perceive as being the risk of going out. There's also the weather factor. Also a cold week impacts on us. Whereas normally we'd be somewhere between 55 and 60,000 passengers a day. Now, as I say, between 6,000 and 8,000, depending on people's movements on the day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So people quite responsible then as the number of cases increase. This is very encouraging. Prof. Karim, to bring you back in, I mean, you had given us an estimate as around what we were expected to reach our peak in the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think it is, that you said, give and take. And I just wanted to know what the risks of that not happening in the time frame are, and also what the risks of experiencing perhaps a second or a third wave of infections here in South Africa are, as we are seeing is taking place in other parts of the world. Prof, I believe that you are muted. If you could just put the right button on and unmute yourself.
Sorry, my apologies. So I was just saying that, we didn't really fully appreciate at the beginning of this epidemic how it would vary by province. So while we had anticipated that it would grow rapidly in Gauteng, the epidemic first took off in Cape Town and in the Western Cape. And now from the Western Cape spread to the Eastern Cape, and now we're seeing Gauteng taking off. So our epidemic is actually going to have varying peaks by province. We are going to see a peak being achieved in the Eastern Cape, following a plateauing that's occurring in the Western Cape right now. And KwaZulu-Natal is still running a few weeks behind. So we're going to see this being stretched out because of the provincial nature of the epidemic. That's also going to mean that we will probably not see as high a peak, but we will see a stretched out epidemic. The implications of that are that we have to be particularly careful with interprovincial travel, because you can't have people traveling from a high-risk province to a low-risk province. We're just seeding the epidemic and spreading it. So we have to be particularly careful. But when we've hit a peak in a province, we are then in a situation to be thinking about much more carefully how indeed we can release certain restrictions, because that's one of the big challenges for public transport right now, is that we have quite low commuter usage, not just because people are working at home, but because we have whole industries not open yet, like the hospitality industry, because it's not safe at this point to open them. So we're going to see this increase in the number of public transport commuters occurring. As that occurs, we are going to have to ensure that we maintain our vigilance, because the thing that really concerns me is that we become complacent. That as a nation, we get fed up, we get tired. Oh, I have to wear a mask again. Oh, I hate it. Now, we can't afford to do that. In the moment that happens, we are then going to regress, and we're then putting ourselves at risk. And so after we see that surge, and after we see that peak, and as we get down to a lower level, then we're going to have to institute the 8th stage of our 8-stage strategy, which is vigilance, because we will then have to be concerned about new seedings of the virus and new waves as we are seeing. So the US right now is seeing a sort of tail of the first wave and the beginnings of a second wave. We've seen second waves in Singapore. We've seen a second wave in Australia, in the Melbourne Flats. So it's a real challenge, because we can't really get rid of this virus because we don't have the technology right now, a vaccine or a cure to do so.
And talking about a vaccine or cure, Prof. Karim, I do understand that quite a few players are making some progress. We are hearing reports that Pfizer and BioNTech have made some progress in their vaccine trials, which is inspiring a lot of people. We're seeing the positive reaction on the markets to that news. What are you hearing around how far we are in the process of getting a vaccine? And, should we get one? How soon until we get it here on the continent?
So it has to be pointed out right at the beginning that humankind, has never made a vaccine against a coronavirus before. This is the first time we're going to do that. There's about 160 different candidates that have currently been developed. Most of them target the conserved region of the virus called the spike protein. At this stage, there's just about half a dozen candidates that are quite far advanced in clinical development. Among them are the ones you mentioned, also candidates from Oxford University, candidates from a company called Moderna, which was one of the first vaccines to reach clinical testing. So all of those are currently in testing. I think the thing that gives me optimism, why do I think a vaccine is doable? It's doable because the virus itself is very stable. So unlike HIV and other viruses that we're familiar with, like influenza, those viruses mutate and they change quite rapidly over time. So that the virus that's around 6 months later is different from the one that was here 6 months ago. So the vaccines therefore don't work 6 months later. In this particular virus, because it's got a proofreading step in the way it unravels its genetic code, we've seen a very stable spike protein. And indeed, the spike protein in 388 viruses that we've got full genome sequences in the whole of Africa is very stable. And it's exactly the same spike protein in Europe, because most of the seeding in Africa came from Europe. So I'm pretty optimistic that we'll get a vaccine. But we're not getting it soon. There is no such quick fix in vaccines. It takes time. These studies need long-term safety. They need long-term immunogenicity. So we're not looking at a vaccine anytime, probably in the next 12 to 18 months. It's going to be well into 2021 in all likelihood. So that's what we need to be ready for.
Paul, just to bring you back and to pick up on the Prof. Karim's point around vigilance, and especially as we have the reopening of interprovincial travel that is expected to continue taking place. In the absence of a vaccine or a cure right now, what is your messaging within your organization to your members around being vigilant and also playing their part in ensuring that, systems like the Gautrain and the Metro Rail are not catalysts in speeding up the spread of COVID-19 here?
Look, what I can say, like Dr. Karim indicated, that sometimes a person become agitated. Take for instance, you can't be on mask for plus minus 7 hours. You travel from one place to another. A commuter that is using, although we don't have a long distance train, but if there was a long distance train, it was going to be a problem to find a commuter that is traveling with a long distance train to be with a mask for plus minus 10 hours. So I can say that if it's not really, really necessary for you to travel, stay at home. Don't force to travel, just stay at home, follow the regulations of the lockdown. But also coming back to what the CEO of a railway safety regulator was indicating in terms of vandalism, I think we need to also to check the justice system, because if a person is arrested with a cable, when they arrive in court, they are charged as a pit crime. They need to check the impact of the economy. There is an economic impact that took place, even if it can be 2 centimeter cable. And to William, because I've heard that Prasa wants to change their copper cable to some of the cables that they don't have a copper. What is your plan in terms of Gautrain? Because we don't want to leave you behind. You find that when those criminals are done with the Prasa, or if they don't get copper from Prasa, they will jump and come to Gautrain. And I also want to request from railway safety regulator if they can facilitate all the captain of the industry, Transnet, Prasa, and the Gautrain, in terms of having, I don't know how we can put, but we need to have a way to close the scrap metal that are buying the copper cables. Because if the scrap metal that are buying the copper cable are closed, I don't think that the criminals will have a way to steal the copper cable where they are going to sell, because the market will be closed. If the government can close alcohol, I think even that one is possible, that can be done.
Right. William, let's come to you then, because in fact the issue of copper theft is a question that some of the participants on the webinar are also asking. So just to Paul's question around your thinking of dealing with this situation long term, and also a question dovetailing on that from the webinar coming to you about copper theft is just the costs. How much did the theft of copper cable and other network items in 2019 cost you, and how much are you expecting for this year? And this is, as you have mentioned, an increase in the incidence of copper theft on your network since the lockdown.
Yeah. So Fifi, to Paul's point around replacing copper with other non-valuable materials, we do that. Unfortunately, when these thieves come into the system, they often just grab and run. So signaling cable is the most valuable one, or used to be. We found incidents where they actually pulled out the non-copper cables. So there was zero value to them, an enormous cost to us. And it's not the cost of the cable itself. That's, I'm not going to say it's manageable. It shouldn't exist at all. But it's the cost, and the train doesn't run. So people waiting on platforms can't make the connection, can't get to work. That's the real cost. There's an economic cost to these things, and that's why cable theft was actually made an economic crime. Because if you go to court and you say, well, the value of the copper that was stolen was 200 Rand, you find a magistrate that said, oh, well, I've got a queue of people out there who need to be prosecuted for thousands or tens of thousands of Rand. So it was made an economic crime because of the harm that it does. I can't remember offhand how many services we lost in 2019 from cable theft. I would recall that it was probably around 5 or 6 days that we were affected. a lot of the stuff happens at night, and our maintain and operator respond very quickly, and they replace and patch the system to get it up and running the next day. But we need a holistic solution to this, because it's Transnet, it's PRASA, it's Gautrain, it's mobile network operators who are losing batteries and cell phone towers and things like that. And I think Paul's got the right approach. Who are the people who are buying these things? Because they have no value if there isn't a buyer for it. So I think it's a combination of community activism, the message going out, if someone steals a cable, everyone suffers. I think it's targeting the buyers and the people who deal in these stolen goods. That's very, very important. And some stiff sentences that go down. Then from an operator point of view, it becomes easier for us and Metro Rail and Transnet for our security systems to manage and to cope. And if we throw into that a dedicated railway police service that can work in the we'll be able to crack this one. But it's going to take a lot of hard work from a lot of players working together.
Right. So quite a number of suggestions they're adding to the suggestion that was given from Paul for TAPA, the regulator, in being, as the industry coming together to really crack down on the syndicates or the buyers of these of copper cables. So as a regulator, what are you thinking around the suggestion? What kind of interventions have perhaps been made in this direction so far? TAPA? Well, we seem to have lost TAPA for just a moment. William, perhaps if we can come back to you again, because there's another question that has come from the webinar for you. Seeing the massive drop in patronage, how are you able to maintain the same amount of trains and buses? Basically, how are you absorbing the financial hit?
So we are part of a public-private partnership. We're sitting in the Gautrain Management Agency on the government side, on the province's side. On the other side, our private partner is Bombela. We very quickly reached an agreement with Bombela that our way through this is by building up that trust and confidence. That we would, as soon as we were allowed to, run our bus and our train services, and we'd run them to the fullest extent, so that when people do decide to travel and it's safer to travel and the numbers start returning, we'll be there for them. It really is. It's a through thick and thin type of approach. The losses, we've both taken a hit on this. I think Bombela probably taking the bulk of the revenue losses. But I think performing really, really well and providing those services and keeping as much of a service going as possible, and without laying off staff. So I think it's taking a long-term view, both from a government point of view and from the private sector point of view, and seeing Gautrain as we've done 10 years, let's do another 20 years. Let's get through this. So I think that kind of approach is the way that we see things developing. How long it takes and how long we can keep that up, well, we'll keep watching that. But I think the commitment is there from both parties to make sure that Gautrain survives and comes through this well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine the exact numbers will be forthcoming in your annual report that when it comes out. But just as we wrap up this conversation, I mean, we're talking about a smart mobility and a more integrated transport system here in South Africa that's safer, that's a lot more convenient. I imagine that's a lot more affordable for commuters here. And Prof. Karim, just to talk to you about that in terms of the future of public transport in South Africa, but from a health perspective. Right now, the Gautrain has has been looking at expansion plans, which I'll get the detail from William in just a moment where that is. But as we are looking to expand our public transport networks, how do we ensure that we do so responsibly from a health perspective, so that when that next crisis does come, as many say is around the corner, it doesn't bring things to a halt to the degree that COVID-19 has?
Absolutely. And when we think about this particular coronavirus, we had two warnings that we received before. In 2002, a bat coronavirus through civets caused the first SARS epidemic in China. Subsequently, about 10 years later, in 2012, we saw another coronavirus, also from bats, that entered into humans through camels, called MERS. So this is the third in the sequence, 8 years later. So I have little doubt we will continue to see this occurring in the future. So we're not going back to the way life used to be, because that's just not taking the lessons that we're learning from this particular coronavirus. We've got to prepare for all future epidemics. And so the steps we're taking now, we've got to institutionalize them. The steps we're taking to sanitize, to ensure that we maintain all of the procedures that reduce the risk of spreading a disease, whether it's influenza, or whether it's a coronavirus, or whether it's some other disease that we're going to see in the future. And this, luckily, in this particular virus, this virus is actually readily killed. It's killed just with soap and water, as we know when we wash our hands. It's readily killed by alcohol. So it's not a hard virus to kill. It doesn't need very sophisticated procedures. It just needs proper cleaning and sanitizing. And so as long as we do that, we reduce the risk of transmission through surfaces quite substantially. So I think how we see that future and how we prepare now will define how we will protect ourselves going forward, whether it's the second wave, whether it's the next coronavirus, or whether it's next year's influenza epidemic. All of those are going to feature.
William, just an update of where the expansion plans are. I imagine that like most big capital expenditure projects here on the continent, there's been some delays because of the pandemic. So perhaps just speak to us about that. But also, as we're talking about the future Gautrain and its systems, how is this pandemic influencing perhaps some of the infrastructure rollout plans around that future that weren't there before the virus hit?
Yeah, Fifi, I think first of all, we've got to frame this in why we would want to expand the Gautrain, right? So we've had a look forward 20 years into the future, and the population of Gauteng is going to increase dramatically. I think we're at 16 or 17 million. We're going to be up to 25 million people by the end of 2037, 2038. The economy will come back. That's just the way things work. It'll be a different world, but the economy will grow, and people are going to have jobs and they're going to have homes. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we, and I'm not talking Gautrain, I'm talking about public transport as a whole, have planned ahead for that, and that we're able to move, I think it's around 4 or 5 million people every morning in the peak period. And get them home again in the afternoon, and scholars and students and people off peak, etc., etc. It's a massive challenge. And one of the things which we struggle with is that rail in Gauteng actually has a very small footprint. The vast majority of people travel between Soweto and Johannesburg, not Soweto and Sandton, which is where there's an enormous amount of jobs. So what we're looking at in terms of an expansion is then linking up as a phase one, first phases of an expansion is linking Sandton and Soweto, so that we can move people a lot faster, a lot easier than they're currently doing. So that's to kind of frame the discussion. We are most definitely going to learn the lessons from COVID-19. We're going to stop looking at rail as a mode of force where people will come because there's no other alternative to it. They'll come because we offer a smart service. We're planning and fitting in a concept called mobility as a service, that people would be able to use their smartphones, smart technology, so that they could plan their trip a week or a month in advance, that we would be able to also give them real-time information on which trains are empty, if social distancing is such an issue, which carriage is the one that's got the fewest people, and where should you stand on the platform when the train comes in. We definitely got to move away from paper ticketing. I can't think of anything worse than asking someone for cash and then giving them a paper ticket in exchange, giving that perfect connectivity and ability for transmission of viruses. So moving over to technology where it's ticketless, people are able to use the same app on their phone, which planned the trip, to pay for the trip, and not just on one mode of transport, but could use that same one, be it on a bus, a taxi, a Gautrain, metro rail. So it really is about changing the paradigm of public transport. Now, I know this all sounds like pipe dreams. Here we are, we're sitting in July 2020 fighting COVID-19. We can't take our eye off the ball about what this province will look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And the message I want to leave everyone is that public transport, and good public transport, is absolutely key to realizing that future. To the extent that we can be a part of sort of a post-COVID recovery, that'll be fantastic. But we've given our feasibility study, our workings, to the National Treasury and National Department of Transport. We're getting very positive signals from both of them that we will be part of the infrastructure plan going forward. So hold thumbs, and we hopefully will have some announcements in that regard over the next few weeks.
Looking forward to them. Thabo, I believe that you are back. Good to be back, or to have you back with us. Just some final words from you. Perhaps if you can also pick up on what Paul had said regarding you as a regulator, cracking down on the syndicates that are buying all of this cables, and also just, we're talking smart mobility, we're talking a more integrated public transport system. As a regulator, how are you guiding your rules and standards to achieve that?
Okay, thank you very much. I think COVID, what this connection just did is to show how unready we are to deal with digitization and obviously, and also respond to this pandemic. We need to do a lot more in that space within the digital environment. But maybe just picking up on the issue that Paul raised around the sort of subs, there is something called the National Railway Crime Combating Forum, which is attended by various state departments, including PRASA, Transnet, Freight Rail, ourselves, the Railway Safety Regulator, Gautrain, SAPS, and the crime intelligence and the HOPs to focus on national crime incidents. And obviously, there should be a lot more focus on because in fact, what he was saying is that you need the whole system to work. So beyond just being able to identify there is a lot of theft, and I agree with William, it is theft largely, not even vandalism. I think vandalism only sort of is about 10% of that. So the majority of it is actually theft. So the justice system needs to work. The security aspect within the various operator space is important. We need to strengthen that. And in fact, in one of our conditions of permit to the metro rail system, because that's where we're seeing the large numbers coming from, we have included an issue around security, ensuring that the plan is responsive to the challenges that is currently being faced by that particular operator. And in fact, one of the things we had requested operators to provide us with at the beginning of COVID and the lockdown was their safety management plans, which shows how they've identified their risks and therefore how they are mitigating. And with those operators that seem to struggle or that seem to have a challenge, we are working together with them to try and ensure that the mitigations are adequate and they are actually responsive to the challenges that are currently being experienced. With regards to smart mobility, I mean, I think, and that's why I made reference to the Gauteng Transport Authority, because it is important that as you do that, you integrate the various systems within the various cities. That also allows you to leverage on the funding, because I think one of the problems you have is that you've got separate funding for Reavaya, separate funding for the Tshwane BRT, and so you actually have to ensure that you can fund the whole system, but you can actually provide for a seamless trip from origin to destination. I think that's what the whole smart mobility movement is about. But also, what I see a lot of cities across the world doing is allocating more road space towards walking and cycling, which are also very important in trying to deal with COVID itself, because people are more active and therefore are able to build a stronger immune system. But also it does address the challenges of transportation. On the one hand, there's micro-mobility that is now even coming into the fray, so the numbers are increasing there. So, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities for the Gauteng government to ensure that we can incorporate these things into our movement, to ensure that there's a similar level of service, not just a good and a level A service on Gautrain, but you actually have to have it throughout the system. Starting from a taxi in the township, it ought to be safe.
True.
Because if that's not safe, you are just merely transferring COVID into a much broader system. Even a good Gautrain system may actually find itself a victim of that lack of integration.
All right, so Tshepo, thanks so much. I mean, we could go on and great insights, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Just one last thank you to my panelists, William Dax, who is the CEO of the Gautrain Management Agency, Professor Salim Abdul Karim, the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 here in South Africa, Paul Soto, a chairperson of the Provincial United Commuters Voice, and Tshepo Khare, acting CEO of the Railway Safety Regulator. It is actually quite hard to believe that just last month, the first train trip from Sandton Station to OR International Airport took off 10 years ago. That's how long the Gautrain has been around. How time flies. Of course, like all rail systems, as we have just heard all over the world, the Gautrain has got a long way to go yet before getting revenues and profits on track. But as commuters, to assist the rail operator move forward, making sure you play your part in stopping the spread of the virus by staying safe and sanitized and masked is important. From myself, Fifi Peters, and the team here, thanks so much for watching. We will see you again next time. Goodbye.